This podcast episode was made possible in part with support from Sacred Rights, a project funded by the Henry Luce Foundation and the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation and hosted by Northeastern University. Sacred Rights is a project that supports public scholarship on religion and provides resources and networks for scholars of religion committed to translating the significance of their research to a broader audience. I recommend you learn more about Sacred Rights on their website at sacred-rights.org or find Sacred Rights on Twitter at sacred_rights. Welcome to Classical Ideas. This is Greg Soden. Since 2017, I have talked to professors, authors, teachers, journalists, practitioners, and scholars about all things related to religion. On this episode, I am delighted to welcome Dr. Vic Thasiah. Vic Thasiah is a professor of religion and a lead faculty member in the Environmental Studies program at California Lutheran University. He is also the founder and co-president of the nonprofit environmental organization Runners for Public Lands. His research focuses on Chinese nature poetry, Native American perspectives on land and running, and environmental philosophy and activism. He is currently working on a book titled Ground Truth: The Natural World, Outdoor Recreation and Environmental Activism. On this episode, we talk about his interests in the natural world, his article Dragon Sun, Tiger Moon, fast packing the Backbone Trail in California from the Ultrarunning website irunfar.com, his In the Works book project, and the importance of being a publicly facing scholar. Please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Vic Thasiah. Dr. Vic Thasiah, welcome to Classical Ideas.
Greg, thanks for having me.
I'm delighted that you're here. I'm wondering if we can kick this off by having you introduce yourself a little bit to the listeners out there so they know just a little bit about who you are and what you do.
I'm from Fresno, California. My parents are from Malaysia. My dad is Indian and my mom is Chinese. And they emigrated to California in the early 70s. And I grew up in Fresno. Yeah, just very much enjoyed the Central Valley of California. And then went off to college in Santa Cruz, California, and really fell in love with the natural world. I got to run trails through redwood forests and be in the mountains and enjoy the Pacific Ocean. I really realized how polluted the environment was in Fresno because I'm so clean in Santa Cruz that my asthma just automatically cleared up.
I was going to say the agriculture is crazy in the Central Valley.
It is. There's a lot of pollution tied to agriculture there, from pesticide drift to idling trucks, et cetera, et cetera. And so the topography of Fresno and the Central Valley is that it kind of sits in a bathtub with the Sierra Nevadas on one side and the coastal mountain ranges on the other. And so a lot of pollution in California gets trapped there. But when I got an airway out in Santa Cruz, I just really loved it there. Then got to go to Oxford for graduate school, so relocated to the UK, and then have come back, and I'm kind of have settled in California. My family lives in Ventura, California. I've got a wife and two kids, two daughters. Work at California Lutheran University as a professor of environmental studies and religion.
Well, let's talk about a little bit about your intellectual path. Your major research areas I see in your bio are Chinese nature poetry, Native American perspectives on land and running, and environmental philosophy and activism. Tell me a little bit about your path into caring about these topics as a scholar and professor.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I have just been in love with the natural world ever since I grew up. Really, in Fresno, California, it was in proximity to the Sierra Nevadas, and so getting to go out to the mountains was just amazing experience to see how vast the spaces were and how small you feel in them and how they really sort of have a life of their own and exist out there looming over you. You should just feel alive, like in those wild spaces. And so just in proximity to the Sierra Nevadas growing up, but then like I said earlier, just being in Santa Cruz and seeing kind of the history of environmental stewardship in California more broadly, but in Santa Cruz in particular, was inspiring both in terms of the terrestrial environment and the marine environment there. And so I got attached to people that cared about those things and certainly was attached to the natural world. That's been a through line since then. And so I'm a trail and ultra runners and so I spend a lot of time outdoors and yeah, again, come alive just in the natural world. And so that's been a major influence in kind of my areas of study and getting involved with an organization that I founded called Runners for Public Lands has also been a major inspiration in terms of working with people initially locally and then regionally and now nationally who are kind of at the intersection of loving to run and loving the natural world and also being really interested in environmental stewardship, both in terms of advocacy and hands-on work, has been a major influence in my interest in these areas of knowledge. And as I've gotten into environmental work, I've noticed that, and I've been inspired by a lot of the work that's been done by indigenous communities around
Mm-hmm.
stewardship, and then really kind of seeing a lot of amazing Black nature writing to a lesser extent, but something that I'm getting more interested in and connected to is Latinx and farm worker writing and justice work. And so there's a number of different cultures in the United States that have a long history of connecting with the environment and protecting the environment. And one of the things I kind of discovered as I was interacting with all these various cultures was Asian Americans and their potential contribution to protecting the environment. And, I grew up knowing really nothing about this rich um, ecological heritage that that Chinese people in particular can bring to the table. And it's something that there may be other Asian Americans that don't know much about this heritage. And just learning a little bit about 20th century American nature writing and environmentalism being inspired by both Chinese Buddhism and Japanese Buddhism, so Chan Buddhism and Zen Buddhism, and Chinese nature poetry, Japanese nature poetry. I just realized and discovered that this is a very, very rich history and heritage that that Asian Americans can draw from and kind of come into the conversation with confidence that they have a strong history and in engaging in nature and environmental protection, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's been my kind of joy and interest to mine that heritage and to see what might be relevant to bring to protecting the environment today in the United States.
So I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Sure.
What are a few Chinese nature poetry collections or books that you might put forward as being something that people should read in your view as somebody who loves that area of interest so much?
We are very fortunate to have an amazing translator of Chinese poetry in the United States named David Hinton, and he's based in New England.
I've read
And
his stuff.
his stuff is amazing. And because he's translated so much, you can kind of see consistency in terms of the way terms and concepts appear in poetry across a number of collections, all the way from the I Ching, the Tao Te Ching, Zhuangzi, and all through these Tang dynasty nature poets. And David Hinton has just translated so much. And so a recent collection is an anthology on Chan Buddhism that includes a lot of this poetry, but he's translated a lot of individual poets, and he has a really good book called China Root, where he talks a lot about how Taoism is in the background of a lot of these Chinese Buddhists and also these Chinese nature poets, and even landscape painting he talks about as well. And so David Hinton is the translator and a great place to start in terms of getting exposed to this amazing heritage.
Fantastic. Let's bring some of your interests together.
Yeah.
You sent me an article called Dragon Sun, Tiger Moon, Fast Packing the Backbone Trail in California. And to me, this weaves together so much of what you're talking about, because in this article, you talk about the heritage of early Chinese civil servants running off to the mountains during periods of social difficulty. You talk about your love of running and nature and mountains. So it ties in this ancient cultural tie in to your own personal interests and lived experiences in the here and now. And you start the piece with a discussion of early Chinese civil servants going off the mountains, which I loved. What do you think is worth knowing for listeners out there about this cultural practice dating back centuries and centuries?
I think one of the amazing things is that it seems like these Chinese poets, and again, these were very, very well educated civil servants who were primarily involved in public service, but also kind of did poetry on the side, and often nature poetry in particular. And I've seen a number of accounts, and David Hinton writes about this as well, of these civil servants kind of having had enough, being exasperated by the political climate and needing a break and running off to the mountains. Sometimes this poetry is called mountains and rivers poetry, that they either write or read or both. They have this assumption that paying careful attention to wild nature, the natural world, was a significant way in which we can be informed about how to be human. So just like a mountain is a mountain, a plant is a plant, an animal is an animal, humans are to be human. One of the most profound ways we can learn about and discover what that might mean for us is being in close proximity to and paying careful attention to the natural world and understanding its rhythms and its power. And so these civil servants, it's not like the natural world begins outside of the city limits. They were well aware that nature was everywhere. They themselves were nature, and that they could kind of go into their gardens and they would be exposed to the natural world. But there was something about mountains and rivers and the raw exposure to the natural world that wild nature provides. And there's a vulnerability associated with that, where you have to pay extra attention to the changes in the sky and the clouds and the topography that just raised your alertness and attention to how the natural world moves. And, you know, at a very basic level, just appreciating how the natural world can be understood in terms of yin and yang, and this idea of hard and soft, hot and cold, you know, darkness and light, and how, you know, balancing these things is the way ecologies work. And it's also the way that human beings work. And I think sometimes when we get fixated on political problems or personal issues, our work lives, our family lives, et cetera, we can lose these rhythms. And in being not aligned with these rhythms is, according to these Chinese ecologists, that's what I'm calling them, you really lose a lot of power. And you can very quickly degenerate and potentially get ill. Worst case scenario is you die. You're just out of alignment with the natural world. What I'm trying to do with this work is just see how these nature poets are valuing nature, and how we as contemporary Asian Americans and the public more broadly can draw from this in terms of energizing our stewardship of the environment and informing us in terms of the value of the natural world, and also how to protect it and its importance for us. And so I think there's a lot there that I'd love to pull out.
Something about the conflict and the degeneration really stands out to me, because the origin of this piece, it stems back to a difficult time in your own teaching, right? Tell me a little
Right.
bit about the origin of this piece that led you to go on an adventure. But I want to know about the origin first before we talk about the adventure.
Absolutely. And so, as you know, and as the whole world knows, October 7th was a dark day for the planet.
Yes.
And the taking of hostages and the massacre around that day for Israelis is I think with the communication technologies now, we're seeing so much happening in real time and in detail that we've really never seen before, unless you're
Hmm.
in the mix yourself, and just like very painful to witness, and certainly that the aftermath of that has been just an extension of that pain and suffering. And so for the hostages on the one hand, and for the people of Gaza on the other. And so in that sort of late fall, early winter period, I teach an introduction to violence studies. It's an interdisciplinary field of study studying the phenomenon of violence at California Lutheran University every spring. And I was thinking about taking on a seminar on Israel-Palestine to give students some background history across the 20th century in terms of the context of this current conflict. And I really was watching, presidents of universities sitting before Congress, and
Hmm.
my anxiety was growing. But yeah, my interest in providing this opportunity for students sort of outweighed the anxiety that I was feeling, and so I decided that I was going to do a two-part seminar in this introduction to violence studies. The first half would be on the history of the Second Amendment, because a lot of students were very interested in sort of what's behind mass shootings on the one hand, but also just the impasse that we've been in as a country in terms of gun rights and gun control. And so we were going to spend the first half of the course on this history, and then the second half of the course, we were going to do a deep dive into a memoir titled My Promised Land, and look at and also watch some documentaries in terms of like Gaza Fights for Freedom, and a film called Paradise Now, and a lot of other associated sort of readings on this history of Israel Palestine across the 20th century. And it took a physical toll on me, unfortunately. And I mean, the second half of the semester was when the student protests started gaining ground and traction. And so we were talking about this in class. I was reading the news every day and trying to do this seminar. And I got headaches, nosebleeds, body hives, fatigue. It just took a huge toll on me. And I took a break during spring break, and I was reading about these Chinese poets, and I thought maybe I'll try what they tried when they were in a political climate that was very difficult, painful, complex, and and taking a toll on them. And so I thought that I could try this traverse across the Santa Monica Mountains in my backyard. Um, it's the only place where mountain lions roam in the vicinity of a metropolis, other than Mumbai in India. And so it's really a unique place to be in the second largest city in the country, and then have the Santa Monica Mountains. And I think it's 40 miles across and 8 miles wide, adjacent to the Pacific Ocean, this wild, wild place. And so there's a 67-mile traverse of it, and it goes east-west because of the way in which the mountain range sits, that you can do. And so I thought, I'm going to try this and see if I can imitate these stressed out civil servants, and find some stillness in the process, and see if I could sort of recover from these physical and mental debilitation that I was experiencing.
The piece goes through a lot of conceptual overviews of, terms that you might read in like Chinese nature poetry from over the years. Tell me a little bit about your thought process as you were going through this experience, and how you were making these connections to your professional work while you were doing it.
At a very basic level, people that are, not Chinese might be familiar with the term Tao, which is this this single generative tissue of the universe that self-differentiates itself in a mysterious and miraculous way, to give rise to everything that we see in the universe. And if we think about this planet, just everything that we see around us. And so when I was like reading about this area and the geology of the area, there were some connections that you can make between this the Tao, as the Chinese understand it, and these volcanic eruptions from these vents in the ocean that have given rise to the entire mountain range and everything that you see around. And so whether that's the landscape, the mountains, and eventually all of the minerals and the plants and the animals. And so there was a way to kind of connect with that Chinese sensibility by just exposing yourself to wild nature. And so it was a way to understand sort of the unfolding of the Tao in terms of how things, how it gives rise to the natural world and its diversity and dynamism, and then how things go through a process of evolving and then de-evolving, and then I'm going back into the ground. And so I was hoping, and I did have this experience of just being exposed to it all day, all night in this long run across this trail, to kind of see not only like this diversity and dynamism of the natural world that kind of comes from a single source, this generative tissue, but I also got to experience what the Chinese call yin and yang, this fluctuation of the atmosphere, of the topography, and also of the ocean. Like in the distance, you can kind of see the tides kind of ebb and flow. And so it was just an amazing experience of getting immersed in what the Chinese understand to be the Tao, and also this fluctuation or these changes or this transformation that they refer to as yin and yang. And another interest of mine was also to try to experience this stillness, which the Chinese call Jing. And it on the one hand, it's about sort of being at peace and being still, just our normal, everyday, conventional understandings of stillness. But it also paradoxically has a meaning and an experience of changing in such a way with the changes that you actually feel at peace as things are changing and as you change with them. And so that was a cool discovery of what that term might mean, having this experience of moving across the trail. So it's kind of like being on a train where the train's moving, and as you're moving with the train, you yourself feel still, right?
Yeah.
And so it's this cool experience. I mean, some people talk about it in terms of flow, but yeah, to be running and for things to be changing around you and to feel stillness seems very strange and paradoxical, but it's something that you can experience. And I think it's something that these Chinese poets, these civil servants in particular, were kind of reaching for in this concept of Jing.
Tell me about the title, Dragon, Sun, Tiger, Moon.
Dragon and sun are associated with yang. And so if you think about that dynamism of a dragon, and you think of and you think of the power and the heat of the sun, that has been historically and culturally reflective of this concept of yang. And then if you think about, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, this film that's very famous, Crouching Tiger has a sense of being secretive, quiet, dark, moving in a slow and stealthy manner, and the moon being the opposite kind of the sun in this kind of cosmology. And so Dragon Sun is a way to represent yang, and Tiger Moon is a way to represent yin. And so finding balance between these two in the natural world and in society and individually is kind of a vision of what you can call he, which is Chinese for harmony.
Excellent. Well, that piece is available on the website, irunfar.com. And so for listeners out there, I'm going to put a link to the article itself in the show notes. So you can go in your podcast app where you're listening to this, and you should be able to click directly on it because I'm going to include it in the notes.
Thanks, Greg.
You're welcome. So Vic, I want to hear a little bit about a book idea that you are developing. And I know it's in the early stages, so listeners can't go out and find this book yet, but they will be someday. And I know the tentative title is Ground Truth, the Natural World, Outdoor Recreation, and Environmental Activism. Tell me a little bit about what you envision the purpose of this book being and what it's going to be about.
Thanks so much for the question. I am really excited about these nature poets and the Chinese ecology that's associated with it, and think it's a remarkable heritage that Asian Americans can draw from and bring to the table in terms of um, environmental protection in the United States. And with the changing climate, with sustainability being on everybody's mind, and with pollution concerns for many people across the United States, environmental stewardship is more important than ever. And I think the more diverse the leadership is in terms of addressing these problems, the better. I think a lot of communities are doing their part: Indigenous people, Native people, African Americans, Latinx people, and the history of conservation in the United States in terms of protecting the environment. And Asian Americans have done their part, and we can do so much more with this rich heritage that we have. And so, Ground Truth, this book is about diving into this Chinese ecology, this early Chinese ecology, through these nature poets, and learning as much as possible about how they viewed and experienced the natural world, and then moving from that to how outdoor recreation can be an opportunity to connect with this sensibility and this perspective and experience it for yourself, and then how that can translate into environmental stewardship work, both in terms of advocacy and in terms of the hands-on kind of work that we can do in our communities to restore our landscapes and to make sure that we have clean air and clean water and landscapes to enjoy. And so that's kind of what the book's about in a nutshell.
Wonderful. Well, I hope that when the book is ready to be talked about as a whole, that you will consider coming back and telling listeners all about it for a return episode
I'd
on
love to.
the podcast. Let's chat about public scholarship a little bit. You are a member of a sacred rights program on public scholarship for scholars of religion who want to get their audit their work out in a broader way. And you're already kind of doing that, like writing on an Ultrarunning website, irunfar.com. I mean, is an example of seeking to broaden and put the knowledge and expertise that you have out there for, for listeners or for readers that aren't in the field of religious studies. Tell me a little bit about why it matters for you to get your work out into the public sphere a little bit more than you might otherwise do as a professor.
The academic community has conversations going on all the time, and it has its own language, it has its own concerns and interests, and its own history that, on the one hand, runs alongside the broader general public, and on the other, interacts with that broader general public all the time. And I just really see value in both. Um, for people that get the opportunity and pursue the line of work of scholarship, they get to pay attention to things in detail and do deep dives into topics as part of their daily work. And so they get to see a lot of things that other people don't get a chance to see. And we can have internal conversations about that within the academic world that are joyful and satisfying and fulfilling. And at the same time, there are things that we get to learn that we can share with the broader public that might be enriching or can be challenging or can be satisfying in terms of their day-to-day understanding about the world they live in and their day-to-day understanding of themselves in that world. And so, on the one hand, public scholarship is getting a chance to share, which is fun to do with the broader public, some of the fruits of what you get to learn, getting to spend extra attention on things. And on the other hand, it's a way to give back because on the one hand, academics are drawing from academic work, but on the other hand, they're drawing a lot from from the broader public. And so public scholarship is a way to kind of honor what you receive from the broader public and to give back to to the broader public. I think one of the most significant experiences that I've had was getting a chance to talk to people in West Virginia about mountaintop removal and the
Mm.
impacts of mountaintop removal. And so I worked for a social policy research group in Chicago years ago. And in 2010, the director of this project took us all to West Virginia and took us to a mountaintop that had been blown apart.
Mm.
And we kind of saw other peaks in the area and how beautiful they were and how forested they were. And we learned about obviously the importance of coal mining, both culturally to West Virginians and economically to the rest of the country and the world. And so we saw some of that complexity, but we also saw forests that were leveled. We saw rock debris and dust covering like the whole rest of the mountain and partially communities in proximity. We saw rivers and streams that looked the color of rust.
Mm.
Then we went into people's homes and we saw rust line their sinks and their bathtubs. We saw that they were buying water from the grocery store because they weren't drinking the water from their taps. We saw it slightly rust color from their taps. And they just kind of talked us through the balance between, work locally and the environmental fallout of that work and the difficulty of changing things. I think you learn so much about the way the world works. You learn so much about corporate activity. You learn so much about community resistance. You learn so much about the risks and benefits. You learn so much about the world, and that's been just as valuable, if not more valuable, than the academic work on mountaintop removal in particular, or more generally protecting the environment. And so when you're learning so much from people and you're gaining so much from people in terms of their experience, it seems like it's only natural to want to be involved in public scholarship and giving back anything that you might learn from the academic side of the house to benefit people in terms of navigating these complex kind of scenarios that people are
Yeah.
facing all over the world.
Do you notice any particular growth in any of your own skills with regards to what you did in the training? Is there anything particular that you feel like, hey, I'm really growing doing X, Y, Z because of this?
It's translation work, and I think that the Sacred Rites program really helped me kind of appreciate that translation has to happen. And it's very challenging in terms of converting academic writing into writing and communication that's more publicly accessible. And
Hmm.
so listening to the other members of the cohort kind of do that and commit to that and seeing examples of that and getting sort of advice on how to do that, I think is one of the strengths of the program. I mean, the people are the first strength, but the practices of doing that. And so I've really enjoyed trying to write op-eds and writing for magazines. And I just sent off a letter to the editor for the New York Times on
Cool.
a article that was written this last week on America's trails. And so I really want to practice shorter sentences and and language that's just accessible.
I'm really delighted by this conversation. And I'm wondering if there's anywhere that you would, you know, suggest folks go check out if listeners out there like what they're hearing and want to follow along with what it is that you do. Where would you suggest people direct their attention?
Well, to get to know me and some of the work that I do, my faculty page at California Lutheran University is a good place to start. I've got a lot of links there to the work that I've done, and it's also a good way to contact me at Thasiah at callutheran.edu. And so that's a good place to start, and would love to connect with anybody that wants to connect around that.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Vic Thasiah, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I loved the article, Dragon Sun, Tiger Moon. I'm excited about the book, Ground Truth, whenever that comes out down the line. Loved hearing about your interests and your journey and your stories and the places that you've been and the adventures that you've had. It's a delightful way to spend an hour of my day today chatting with you about these things. So thank you so much for being here and hanging out and coming on Classical Ideas.
Thanks, Greg, for having me.